Good afternoon.
Hello.
Right, well, hello, everybody. And
Hello, David.
hello, I
Hello.
see a number of friends on the screen. You are all very welcome to this webinar about our new research initiative. I need to tell you that it is being recorded this afternoon. We advise keeping your microphones muted and your screens off, but when we get into the discussion element of this, do feel free to turn your screens on when you want to ask a question. I'm going to hand now to the chair of the Observatory's Research Committee, Giga Zendania, and he's going to introduce this afternoon. Giga, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar of the Magna Carta Observatory. Our topic today, as you know, is responsive and responsible university. And this is the first webinar dedicated to the launch of the research project on the same topic developed by the MCO. End of 2022, the signatories of the Magna Carta Universitatum have received the invitation to become participants of this project. And the idea of this webinar is to discuss the project in the company of the people who designed it and the university representatives who hopefully will be interested in engaging with it. Among today's speakers, we have, first of all, David Locke himself, the Secretary General of Magna Carta Observatory, who, apart from giving administrative support, has been participating actively in the design of this project. And we have three distinguished members of the research committee: Professor Chris Breen, who hopefully will be joining us soon. He has some technical problems. Emeritus Professor John Davis and Professor Marcin Palis. We also have one member of the research committee who unfortunately couldn't be present with us. It is Professor Chanita Roxpol-Muang. Actually, the list of achievements and recognition of all the speakers is so long that I will refer you to the document which you have received in the form of a brochure, which was sent to all the registered participants of this webinar, and you can find the background information about the speakers there, and I will save time and just move to the topic itself. But before moving to the topic, I would like to extend our special thanks to the previous president of Magna Carta, Seibold Observatory, Seibold Norda, whose idea actually it was, the initial idea to establish a research committee, and beyond that, who gave us invaluable advice about the direction and the modalities with which we needed to proceed. Now, just a couple of words about the topic and project itself. As you are aware, in 2020, Magna Carta Universitatum was updated. There have been some significant changes as compared to the 1988 version of the declaration. One of these changes was that, apart from and in addition to freedoms guaranteed in the earlier version, the 2020 Magna Carta Universitatum mentions responsibility as a foundational value. It states that, I quote, universities have a civic role and responsibility. And that, I quote again, universities acknowledge that they have a responsibility to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world and to the communities they serve, to benefit humanity and contribute to sustainability. And it was to support the introduction of this principle to the declaration that the Magna Carta Observatory has launched the research theme on the responsive and responsible university we are discussing today. When we talk about the foundational principles of the higher education, first ideas and concepts that come to mind are, of course, the concepts of academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And we by no means intended to downplay their importance when we thought that we would focus our work on responsiveness and responsibility. We had many discussions about the topic and came to the conclusion that this focus would address the gap in knowledge. The gap, if we compare it with the knowledge about the principles of freedom and autonomy in higher education and their implementation around the world. To repeat, in no way we wanted to create the impression that we are abandoning the ideas of freedom and autonomy as foundational for the academic space. Just on the contrary, I personally would even go as far as to think that we should interpret the idea of responsiveness and responsibility as furthering the autonomy of the university, since we are here talking about the responsibility which university itself defines and assumes, not something which is being assigned and ascribed to it from the outside. But we would also wanted to avoid the interpretation of these foundational principles in a way which would isolate academia from society, making their mutual interpenetration impossible. So this self-defined as self-chosen responsibility of the university toward the local community or national or global society is not an add-on or a supplement, something which is added as like a later step, but it directs and affects the whole vision and practices of the institution from the outset. We are, of course, very well aware that we are not the first to start talking about the concept of responsibility in the context of higher education. There has been some very valuable work done, both theoretical and practical. I am glad to mention that Chris Brink, who has published extensively on the topic, is a member of the research committee and hopefully will be presenting his elaboration of the conceptual framework of the research project. I would like to mention here the University Social Responsibility Network for its valuable work. And actually its representative took part in the first webinar, which was devoted to the issue by the MCO in the fall of 2021. I think the concept of the civic university, which was discussed quite intensely in the UK context during the last decade, is also quite close, but not identical to what we would like to conceptualize here. And we would like to focus on foundational dimension of responsiveness and responsibility. We are very interested in, but not limited with, the impact of universities on their immediate communities. The challenge taken up by university can be of national or even of a global dimension. With Magna Carta Observatory, we have an opportunity to develop research project together with interested partners out of the pool of more than 900 signatory universities from around the world. And this gives us confidence that diversity of approaches to the subject can be sufficiently covered. Once again, we would like to approach it not on our own as the committee, but together with the signatory institutions of Magna Carta Universitatum. We would like to make this a learning experience for everybody, starting with ourselves. And to encourage this, we would not want to focus on success stories exclusively, but we would like to learn from failures as well. So we know that it takes more courage to talk about where you failed than where you succeeded, but we hope that the interest of pursuing knowledge for the cause of common good will give us this courage. And as was indicated in the initial letter from the committee to the signatory universities, we would like the case studies to be reflexive, analytical, and self-critical, to be transferable to other cases and contexts. Our main interest is not so much the presentation of individual projects of university engagement, however successful they were, but the analysis of the way universities respond to and take responsibility over their social or perhaps even natural environment. And as most of you would know, this is not a first special project undertaken by Magna Carta Observatory. The Living Values project has been very successfully implemented over the years. We hope this success can also be made transferable to the context of a research project. So that's the a brief description of it. And now I would like to hand over to David Locke, the Secretary General of the MCO. David, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Giga. I'd just like to say a few words about how the research fits into what the Magna Carta Observatory is doing before Chris comes on to talk about the conceptual framework, and then John says something about how you can be engaged. Magna Carta Observatory has a strategy. Current strategy runs from 2020 to 25. And there are a number of big headline themes in that. The first is to enable universities to have more impact through the application of their values. And Giga has already mentioned the Living Values project. Now, how can the observatory do that? Well, one of the ways is to engage more closely with the signatories. And we know that engaging with society is difficult. And we know that it's difficult to incorporate within the curriculum and within the research all the things that you need to do to engage with society effectively. And so consequently, we took the decision to invest in a 3-year research project. And we want to do it in a way which fits with the Magna Carta strategy. So the first thing is we're not going to do this in isolation. We're going to do it with signatories. And that's why the invitation was sent out. But we're not going to restrict this research and the findings of this research to signatories. We want the Magna Carta website to be the go-to resource for universities wanting to find out more about how their values can have more impact. And so one of the terms of engagement is that the findings of this research will be shared in a special part of our website. Now, I think the next thing to say is one of the things which enabled the Living Values project to work reasonably well was that the universities, the signatories that were implementing it, would meet together from time to time. They would share their experiences, they would learn from each other, and so on. And the plan is that we will do that with this research as well. So I hope that those few words will give you the main reasons why we in the observatory have decided to invest in this piece of research. Now, in the background papers, you have the conceptual framework, which this piece of work is based on. And I'm delighted to say we now have the leading author of that, Professor Chris Brink, on the call with us. And Chris, can I hand over to you to talk colleagues through that, please?
Yes, thank you, David. Can I just check, can everybody hear me and see me?
We can, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Hello, everybody, from a very warm summer's day in Cape Town in South Africa, where we have the usual issues with power cuts and all sorts of other things. So if I had some difficulty logging on, but here I am now. So lovely to join you. The conceptual framework. This comes out of a simple observation, which is that there is a subtle but very important difference between the Magna Carta of 1988 and the Magna Carta updated version of 2020. And the difference is that in 1988, the concept of academic freedom was the paramount principle. And that is reaffirmed actually in the 2020 document, but something is added in 2020. And what is added in 2020 is that we must realize that with academic freedom comes responsibility to society. And there is a much quoted little paragraph, which I'm going to quote again in the Magna Carta of 2020. It says, universities acknowledge that they have a responsibility to engage with and respond to the aspirations and challenges of the world. So societal challenges, our response to those societal challenges, and the basic idea that this is a responsibility of universities. So when we realized that, and we felt the need to start unpacking and conceptualizing all of this, we realized that volumes, libraries full of books have been written about academic freedom, but nowhere near as much attention has been paid to the idea of responsibility, of academic responsibility. And the research project, in a sense, is to try and address that, to articulate a common understanding of what we consider as academics, what we consider our responsibility to society to be. And the conceptual framework hopes to make a start in that direction. So that little document, it falls into 4 parts. The first part is just to mention again, the idea of academic freedom is, there's a vast literature about it. So we ask ourselves, what can we add? What is new from our perspective? And we felt we have to begin with the premise that freedom, academic freedom or freedom in general, it cannot just be about being left alone to do whatever we want. There must be a sense of purpose to it. What is the purpose of this freedom that we are so insistent on, and what is its contribution to society? We also felt that it is not just about academic freedom in the individual sense. There's a whole literature, a sub-literature, as it were, in that regard about freedom and relationship to tenure and that kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about academic freedom at the institutional level, and so as much also about institutional autonomy and its counterpart as responsibility. And so we begin with a basic distinction between 2 questions, which I have often articulated in many forums. The first question is, what are we good at? And the second question is, what are we good for? And the notion of responsibility, of course, comes in very much with the second question. When we try to unpack what are we good for, do we feel that that is a response to the question of what do you see as your responsibilities to society? We then, in the second part of the document, we go on to make a sort of an empirical observation. And that is that there is definitely a perceivable change in our understanding of the mission of higher education, so that it begins to put the question, what are we good for, on par with the question of what are we good at, the traditional question of what academics do. And so there are quite a few examples, and we mention a few. There's the notion of the engaged university, very common. There are books about it, the engaged university, seminars about it, conferences about it. And that notion of engagement with society is, of course, part of the question of what is our role? What is our role in society? There's also the, over the past 10 years or so, the notion of an additional category of research evaluation. It used to be research evaluation, whether for grants or for government funding, used to be all about our outputs. How many articles have you published, in what kind of journals, what is your citation index, and so on and so forth. But the new category of evaluation is what is all this, what difference has it made? And so that is the question about impact, the societal impact of the research of universities. And again, this is usually more at the institutional level than at the individual level. And there are other examples. There's the notion of university social responsibility. There are different attempts to universities to address issues of social importance, of social justice, and so on. And so we believe there is a growing understanding that universities have a responsibility to society. We just do not have the theoretical underpinnings and the apparatus, as it were, to unpack it, to articulate it. So to get to responsibility, we have a sort of a route towards it through the notion of responsiveness. Engagement, which is a common word now, engagement is an excellent concept. It positions us as part of society. But very often, universities' engagement agenda emanate from the priorities of the university itself. We decide what our research topics are, and then we go out into society and we looked, as it were, for affirming instances. So we feel that responsiveness is the other way around. It is to acknowledge that there are problems, societal challenges, big issues in society that we need to ask ourselves if we have the knowledge resources to make a contribution towards addressing those challenges and making a contribution to the common good, then it seems to be morally irresponsible not to go ahead and to do so. And that gets us to the idea of academic responsibility as a sort of a logical counterpart to the idea of academic freedom. It's very often quoted that with freedom comes responsibility. That is, as Shakespeare would have said, more honored in the breach than in the observance. You would often see long discussions about freedoms and rights. You very seldom see similar length discussions about responsibilities. So we believe it is worth exploring this idea as a sort of a guiding principle, both descriptive and normative, for what is happening in higher education globally. And as I said, it's not yet been articulated in anywhere near the same length. So to begin with, we cite three arguments. We believe there's a logical argument, the sort of duality, if you like, the notion that freedom and responsibility must go together. There is an empirical argument that is a trend, a direction, a pattern of what is happening in higher education globally. And then there is the moral argument that in a world beset by challenges in your city, in your region, nationally, globally, if we have knowledge resources that can make a contribution to address those challenges, then it seems morally irresponsible for us to say that's not our business, that we just concentrate on writing papers, and that in due course, in the fullness of time, that will have an effect. So we also point out some distinctions that may be useful, we think, but there may be others. Most important is the distinction, we think, between individual and collective responsibility. And in part, that is just to try and cut the subject down to size, because the subject is huge. But it's also, since we are talking about universities and higher education, which it seems a practical starting point. We're interested mainly in institutional responsibility. Then it is important to acknowledge that going down this route, there are some risks. Most prominent, of course, is the risk that the moment we acknowledge that we have a responsibility to society or a set of responsibilities to society, then others may be very keen to tell us what they think our responsibilities are. Governments, for example, are often quite keen to tell universities what their responsibilities ought to be. So that's not the only risk. There are others, and we acknowledge those. But we believe that the rewards are more important than the risks. The rewards outweigh the risks, and we list some rewards as well. And the most prominent, I think, the most fundamental reward is that we believe, this is crucial to the entire enterprise, we believe that the motivation for the defense of academic freedom will be strengthened if we acknowledge at the same time and we articulate at the same time what we consider our responsibilities to be. And that is why we propose two fundamental principles. The first is that every university, I quote from the document, every university should be free to decide for itself where its responsibilities to society lie and how to exercise them. And the second one, equally important, is no university should neglect doing so. We think it is time for every university to apply its mind to this issue. What do you think are your responsibilities to society? So that's the document, and it's a beginning, it's a starting point. We'd be keen to hear your comments, your contributions, your ideas. If I may make a few suggestions. Here are a few questions to begin with. The first one is, at your university, do you think that your university has a responsibility to society? And if so, what do you think it is, or a set of responsibilities? Just a little caveat, I'm sure we would all agree that every university has a responsibility to do research and to do teaching and to do it well. So let's please take that for granted. Yes, we do have a responsibility to do good academic work in the classic sense, but is that all? What is there beyond just doing research and teaching? If there is more, then what does this additional part or parts, what does it consist of? Then, if you do think that your university has a responsibility to society, have you articulated that in some sort of institutional manner? Have you included such a notion in your institutional policies, in your strategies? And if you have included it in your policies and strategies, it would be very interested to hear your formulation. How would you formulate the notion of a university's responsibility to society? And then, just to give a bit more direction, can you articulate your understanding and your implementation of the notion of academic responsibilities in such a manner that other universities can learn from it? What we're we're interested in proper sort of theoretical analyses of this notion, and we're interested in transferable lessons. We're interested in what can other universities learn, what can the sector learn from your views and your experience. We're quite frankly not really very interested in hearing a university just blowing its own trumpet. There are plenty of examples. There are books, there are conference proceedings with lots of information about how universities go about engagement projects and their achievements in this regard and what they have accomplished. But we'd like to move away from the university itself to the sector. What are the transferable lessons? What are the theoretical underpinnings? And so what can the rest of the sector learn from your views, from your analyses, from your articulations, from your policies, from your strategy? What are the theoretical underpinnings of your work? And I hope with that bit of guidance that has given some clarity to the document, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chris. But before you go, there is one comment in the chat which relates to your presentation, rather than, although it does relate to the project as a whole. If you look at the chat, you'll see it. It's from Ava Egron-Pollock. Often the notion of university accountability has been used rather than responsibility. And I wonder how you would distinguish these two expectations of universities. Additionally, when we seek a responsive university in a highly polarized society, we could ask, responsive to whom? And Ava wonders if you can share some thoughts on that before we pass to John.
All right. Well, thank you, Ava. Challenging questions. I think on your two questions, actually. I think the first is there's a classic difference between responsibility and accountability. And that is that when you speak of accountability, you are accountable to somebody. If you work in a university, you are accountable as the president, you're accountable to your board, other people are accountable to you. You are, as it were, the reporting agent. Responsiveness, in my view, in our view, is something that is inherent to the agent itself, the agent, him or herself, the institution itself. So we're not asking what you think your university, we think your university should report to. We are asking about your own view of what you think your responsibilities are. So responsibility, in a classic sense, inheres in the individual, and accountability is about who you account to for the way you exercise your responsibilities. On your, let me just see if I can get the second question back. There we are. Responsive to whom? Well, I think it's not responsive to whom, because that would be, again, the confusion between responsibility and accountability. I would say the question is, you can be asked accountable to whom? That would be a sensible question, but responsive to what rather than to whom? Responsive, so let me give some examples. Your university, your organization, you may decide that you would believe it is one of your responsibilities is to deal with issues raised by the United Nations Societal Development Goals. Take climate change, for example, or one of the other 17 societal goals. Then you are responding to a challenge out there. If you're a university rather than an organization, you may have climate scientists, you may have technologists and so on, who can help to address problems relating to climate change. And then you are responding to what? You are responding to climate change. So COVID would be an obvious example. When the pandemic. By the way, I'm just recovering from COVID myself. So if I sound a little incoherent, I hope you will excuse the brain fog that comes with COVID. When COVID came about, many universities responded immediately and effectively and started seeking solutions. So they didn't feel accountable in the sense that they have to report to somebody what they're doing. They felt a moral responsibility to try and put their knowledge resources to work. And so the question to whom goes with accountability. The question about responsibility goes with the question to what, responsive to what. And I'll stop there. Thanks again, David.
Well, thank you, Chris, and no evidence of brain fog at all.
Okay.
So, I hope you continue to recover well. Jenna, I wonder if you'd mind if we hold your question until after John has spoken, because John is going to say a little bit about how universities can engage with this project, and then we'll have a time when we can discuss any points which you want, including, Jenna, the points which you're kindly sharing in the chat. So, John, over to you.
Well, good afternoon. If it's still afternoon, colleagues, very nice to catch up with you. And you know, I think quite a lot about the background of the project already, so I needn't sort of rehearse that. What I think we're very much interested here is that we do produce projects with you, which are really going to be very useful from a number of points of view. As Chris mentioned, we're certainly interested in you helping us add to the store of knowledge on this whole area of social responsibility and responsiveness, and that's really, you know, demands some, you know, quite systematic investigation. The second thing I think is, and this has come out quite well, is that we do see this project as being very much inspirational, in the sense that it ought to encourage a lot of institutions who are already doing things to do them better, do them more systematically, and do them more effective with the impact which Chris mentioned. So it does imply, I think, a certain specificity there about good practice and bad practice as well. The third thing, I think, which it ought to do is to provide a vehicle for analysing your own actions in the university. So it should be, I think, concerned with real challenges and real issues. And it therefore, of course, becomes part of a sort of action research type of mode, if you like. It's not just about recording what you've done, it's recording how we've done it and the effectiveness as well. And that's where I think a lot of the learning for other people will come out. And it does imply, therefore, a fourth big aim, which is collaboration and cross-fertilization of experiences between the institutions which do decide to participate with us here. So the business of dissemination, I think, becomes really quite important, not just through the normal means, but there may be other means by which we can disseminate as well. So our hope, I think, very much as a result of this session, is that you will feel very motivated to sign up and join the project and prepare for us what we've called in our literature a sort of case study, if you like, which will give effect to what we are trying to do. A case study, I think, is a story about an initiative which you've done in the particular setting. And therefore, I think it ought to tell us quite a lot about the dynamics which you've gone through in order to do this. So I've produced, I think, some briefing notes, which we'll happily share with you in due course, as to how this might take place. And I should emphasize, I think, that our aim is not at all to be prescriptive in terms of what you do and how you do it, but mainly offer some suggestions from other similar initiatives undertaken elsewhere, which have worked quite well. So in terms of getting the thing going, I think there are a number of points which perhaps we ought to mention. The first thing, of course, is, as Chris suggested, we're really interested in your strategy for engagement with society and various societal groups. And that, I think, will form quite an important part of the case study which you actually produced. But it's often, I think, very insightful to explore this strategy with regard to a particular challenge which you have either experienced already, and it's you're fairly happy with the way in which things have gone, and it's recording and analysing and reflecting on what you've already done. It might be, of course, a challenge which you're about to set up, and therefore you are using it to try and identify the sort of dimensions of what you want to do. And it may mean, of course, that you are halfway through the process of doing the response to this particular challenge anyway. So I think our feeling is you can come in wherever you fancy as far as that general sequence is concerned. But it's very much about collecting evidence, I think, to tell us exactly what you've been doing. Now, apart from the strategic statement, therefore, I think, and your evaluation of it, there are various challenges, of course, which you could use in order to demonstrate the sort of thing which you've got involved here. And looking around the contemporary world of higher education, there's clearly a great many of these, of course, which come to mind, which we know universities are very concerned about, and what they are trying to do with their local communities, or national or international communities. These would include, for example, such things as sustainability and what we do with the accompanying issues involved with sustainability. There may be community projects in terms of helping communities develop to overcome things like poverty, mass immigration into a particular country or into a particular region. There may be issues involved in underprivileged groups and what we're going to do for them, including migrants, of course, as a case in point. There may be all sorts of challenges in terms of war, terrorism, civic unrest, and so on, which universities feel a responsibility and a responsiveness to do something about. There may be issues, of course, relating to the so-called cancel culture, wokeism, if you like, in higher education, which is clearly quite a big issue in terms of academic freedom in universities at the present time. So there may be a variety of different challenges which are very important to you in your particular university, but what I think we would suggest that it's really not for us to say what the challenges are. It's very much up to you to define, what challenge you feel you'd like to sort of explore in some detail. And we're obviously happy to discuss this with you before you start. But the main thing, I think, is that it should be rooted in reality. And strategy ought to be rooted in reality. The challenge ought to be rooted in reality. And that's why I think we come then to the next point, which is the nature of the cases themselves and the documentation which you might produce. We would expect, I think, that you could certainly demonstrate that you have engaged with various stakeholders, societal collaborators, NGOs, local governments, companies, and all the rest of it. And I think we're very much interested in the processes of engagement which you have used and whether those processes worked or not. So I think the point is that it does mean that the character of what you produce for us shouldn't be descriptive solely. we clearly need to have some description and some facts, but I think the point is that it should be analytical, it should be reflective, it should try and identify the things which have worked and try and identify the things which have not worked, because we can learn a great deal for this. So the self-criticality of it, I think, is important. And this is going to be especially significant, I think, for what learning others people take from the work which you do. And the other people, of course, will be policymakers at national and institutional level. They may very well be societal groups. The audiences will certainly include higher education institutional leaders at various levels as well. So it's not about institutional propaganda, if I can put it that way. It's really about a genuine open reflection on what you've been doing. Again, we don't want it to be too prescriptive about size of the document which you produced. It clearly mustn't be too brief, otherwise there's not much to learn from. Equally, of course, it mustn't be too vast, otherwise we're going to get totally overwhelmed by these documents as well. So I think we might suggest that if we're thinking of a sort of a page ballpark figure of something like about 20 to 30 pages at the outside with appendices, that might be really quite good. Now the question is, of course, next question is, what do we need to know in the case, accepting the fact that it's not prescriptive? What are our expectations about what would be helpful things to put into the case in terms of content? Certainly, I think the issue itself, sorry, I beg your pardon, let me go a little bit further. Certainly the setting first of the institution, what sort of institution it is, where you stand, of course, on the general strategy and policy regarding social responsibility, what the underlying values are as far as that's concerned. And I think that's going to be really important, so we can get a general understanding of where you are in your particular situation. The second thing, I think, is the issue itself, which you might like to pick up and look at. Up to you to decide what this might be. We've indicated a number of examples of this, both Chris and I, but do not at all feel confined by these. There will be certainly others which you can use as well. We'd certainly be very interested, thirdly, in who are the actors involved. Who are the actors involved? How did you engage with the actors and how successful was it? Fourth, I think we've got the question of the time scale of the thing, the stages through which the action evolved. And then, of course, it's the question of outcomes and impact. What actually happened as a result? What use was made by our collaborators of the work which you undertook? And throughout all this lot, of course, we were interested in what you felt worked very well. We're interested in what you feel didn't work very well, and therefore, of course, what you might have done differently, having learned from the particular experience. So in the case which you produce, therefore, I think we're very much interested in the content of what you were trying to do, but we're very, very interested indeed in the processes which you used to undertake the project, to engage with stakeholders and users and partners and all the rest of it. And finally, I think from our own point of view, we'll be very happy to provide whatever assistance we can as quasi advisors, if you like, or consultants to help you in your particular case think through what you want to do. I think at that point I'd better stop, David, because there's some more work to be done. Thanks very much.
There is indeed, John, but thank you very much. And can I just say a couple of things before passing this back to Giga, who will chair the questions. The first thing is John has described what we're looking for ultimately. What we're looking for initially is a shorter statement of what it is you think you might like to contribute to this project. Now, we have said that we would like to have that by the 1st of February, which I appreciate is only 12 days away. But if you're in a situation where you can't get it together by then, but you think you're going to be interested, just please put an email in so that we will know to expect something from you in due course. And just a couple more details. Part of this initiative, the Magna Carta has employed a research assistant, Julia Barroso. Now, Julia is going to be working with us in preparing a repository, providing assistance to the project as a whole, and will become a central point in all of this. And the last point is that our expectation is that most universities will find this exercise valuable for themselves and will do it as part of their normal research activities. But we recognize that there are some universities that may need a little financial help to do this. And so consequently, we put a little bit away, which can be used for this. But can I, Giga, now hand the webinar back to you? There are, right, I've just seen a message from you. You can tell this is in real time. Giga has got a slight problem coughing and has asked me to continue. So Jenna, can I bring you in? Jenna from Ireland. You have been very helpfully putting into the chat some information from Ireland. And I just wonder if you'd like to join us online just to say a little bit more about that.
So, hi everyone, my name is Jenna. I'm based in Limerick in the southwest of Ireland. I'm in my third year of my PhD and I'm doing virtual community as a practice for postgraduates to reduce social and intellectual isolation because attrition rates globally are as high as 70%. Through that, I ended up being the postgraduate representative for Ireland. And through that, I ended up luckily being involved in a whole host of wonderful initiatives, like this new course the government's running for engaged research for societal impact. So I'll be starting that in 2 weeks' time. But obviously, you know, all the other great initiatives that Ireland are looking at, like the Creating Our Futures campaign, which was getting people, ordinary people, they had a little minibus on the road, they came around, they gave free coffee, they stopped up for universities, in streets, and they got the public to come and give recommendations on research they thought would be valuable. And to try and bring it to the layperson and to be able to bridge that gap between academia and the layperson, obviously. So they've been really interesting initiatives. Obviously, I think it was last year or 2021 that was done. So they're still in their infancy, but we're obviously looking into that area. And then with the new government department and evidence-based policy making, has been fantastic. So personally, research for research's sake, although it's a great thing to be able to indulge in, personally, from my perspective, I believe that there should be real world value. If we're not solving problems in society, what are we doing this research for? So that's my own thinking process on it. But obviously there are people who, you know, feel that they're, you know, and they're great research done on other areas that necessarily mightn't impact society, but may have a link somewhere in the chain. So I suppose that's where I'm also involved with the Global Student Forum and other initiatives in bringing change in education and other places. So that's just me. I just wanted to answer some of Chris's questions that he felt who should be accountable. And I believe that I suppose the institution, the higher education institution, should be working closely with government and possibly local businesses, charities, societies, public organizations, that there should be chains or communities of practice set up between these networks to be able to develop real world solutions and make that research really matter.
Jenna, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you for mentioning the Global Student Forum, because we work very closely with them. In fact, one of their members sits on our governing council. We also work with the European Students' Union, and in another piece of work this year, which we will be announcing in April, we will be working more closely with the Student Union and looking at the way in which they are involved in the university's contribution to society. So thank you very much to that. Just looking down the chat, Sandra has sent a message to everybody expressing an interest in getting involved. Sandra, we welcome that very much indeed. My suggestion to you would be to send an email to Magna Carta at unibo.it and just sort of introduce yourself that way, and then we'll be able to get in touch. I notice from the visuals that Giga seems to have stopped coughing. So let me just say one more thing, and then I'll pass back to him in the hope that he is able to thank our speakers and say any last words. The thing that I want to say is we've got a super research committee at Magna Carta, great people from different countries, working really well together. But by no means do they have the monopoly of all wisdom or all information. And so if you've heard something today which causes you to think, why didn't they think about this? Or why didn't they do it this way? Then please send us an email. As we've said earlier on, we're really looking for your ideas. We want you to do the things, make your presentations in the way that is meaningful to you. We've had some expressions of interest in already, which is good. And in the early part of February, we will have a look at these as a committee and then get back to you. Giga, can I hand back to you? Are you able to say a few words of thanks to our colleagues and our participants?
And first of all, thanks to you, David. Actually, Chris had COVID, but I had this H1N1 flu, which is not much better. So thank you very much. Thanks for the interest. And we really hope that this webinar is actually the beginning of the collaboration and cooperation between us. So we hope that you're sufficiently interested, if not so much by our kind of discourse than by the topic itself, to work with us in producing quality research on the topic of responsive and responsible university. And as David said, we are open to your suggestions, to tweaking of the ideas, and to kind of considering different approaches. John actually also said that the research won't be only empirical, it will have definitely analytical kind of normative also dimensions as well. So would very much looking forward to cooperating with you. Thank to all the speakers, thank to all of you for your interest and engagement, and hope you to see more of you in this year and the years to come.
Thank you, Giga, very much indeed. I've put the contact email address into the chat. It's on the Magna Carta website, and do please get back to us with any questions or any suggestions. and look forward to receiving your submissions.